Hello, SuperCoach fans. Welcome to this week's episode of the SuperCoach Sanctum. I'm here with Dan and George again this week, just the three of us. How are we, boys?
Yeah, going well, going well.
Good
Yeah,
to hear.
very happy.
Great
Lots of
to
footy
hear.
back, so very keen.
Exactly right. Footy's nearly back, which means SuperCoach is more pressing than ever. This is episode 2 of the season. Looking forward to giving you some of our SuperCoach advice here at the SuperCoach Sanctum. We're going to start off. If you're interested in the new rules to Supercoach, go back and watch last week's episode. I'm not going to run through them again. We'll just have a quick chat about who caught our eye so far in the warm up games. We've got last year we had Gary's and Nathan's for those who watched. Gary Ablett's the ones that start and we loved in our team, and Nathan Ablett's the ones that, not that flash. Just got a couple we've picked out from the first lot of practice games. George, mate, I might throw to you. Who you got for us that caught your eye and maybe not so much?
Yeah, I wasn't able to voice break there. Nice, good start. Wasn't able to keep, wasn't able to watch too many of the games, but was keeping an eye online. So an honorary Gary goes to anyone taking stats with all the games, AFL Central, Supercoach Edge, or a few that were doing it. So I just want to give a shout out to them. They made everyone's lives on Twitter so much easier. In terms of actual players, my Gary for the week was Alex Sexton, guy who's sort of been floated, maybe playing back, very cheap in our forward lines. Turns out he's going to be taking kick-ins, it seems. He's collecting the footy off a half-back, working in tandem with Buderick, someone we spoke about last week. So, yeah, looks like we've got a real F6 option for someone who's bottom price. Speaking about our Nathans, similar player, cheaper defender this time, Toby Pink, was fine in the game against Collingwood, but just, I don't know if that job security is going to be there for the year. And where there's not many defensive rookies, losing another one, potentially, really not a good start. Dan, what do you think?
No, I completely agree with that, and as you said, I do really like the look of Alex Sexton. My preseason Gary, just looking at what was going on in that West Coast game against Fremantle. Look, this is just one of interest. I don't actually necessarily rate this guy too highly, but he took the majority of the kick-ins for West Coast, and that's Jaden Hunt. Obviously traded from Melbourne last year. He was actually one of their few players that played an okay season. Didn't sort of set the world on fire or anything like that, but for a team that's going to have a lot of ball in their D50, he's a guy that you might want to look just as a bit of point of difference. For my Nathan, I've gone with Marty Hall. We spoke about this guy last week, and I spoke about the fact that why would you like bring a guy back in after delisting him and then not play him, and then he only came on for like the second half, and didn't really do much. Yeah, again with the world of uncertainty around some of those defensive rookies, maybe worth waiting.
Yeah, fair call. I agree with Marty Hoare there. Why would you bring him in and then not even give him a game? But anyway, my Gary was Harry Sheezel. We're just naming halfbacks who get endless possessions. It feels like between the three of us. He, I think his ownership's doubled since that first preseason game. He just racked it up, and he's only going to be better than last year, where he managed to win the BNF, I reckon. So he's almost turned into a lock for me. I reckon he's very impressive. My Nathan was a bloke who I think last year I've had him the whole year. Was a Gary and a Nathan numerous times, and that's Andy Brayshaw at Freo. Just noticed that they're trying a bit of a different mix for the midfield. I think they weren't happy with how it worked last year at Freo. We talked about Hayden Young last week being in there, and I think Brayshaw spent a fair bit of time out on the wing as opposed to the inside mid. So if that's the case, not for me. He's not going to average 110 plus out on that wing, so avoid if you were thinking about him, I reckon. Any others before we move on that caught your eye? George, do you want to tell us about the practice games coming up maybe as well?
Yeah, so we're recording this on the Monday night right before the community series, I think it's still called, and right before the Collingwood Richmond game, which we actually have squads for. There are a few notable things that I think are just worth keeping an eye out for tomorrow night. We'll start with Collingwood. Most important one, I reckon, is Finn McRae, currently named as an interchange. Tom Mitchell's at half forward, and there's no Scott Pendlebury, so there's really questions over whether he's going to be getting CBAs in that midfield, let alone playing time. If maybe Pendlebury was there and he was on the bench, I'd be a little less worried, but that's a bit disappointing. Nathan Kruger as well, someone who was potentially a R3 for us, is only an emergency. He hasn't even made that extended bench, so that is quite concerning. Reece McInnes, though, 123k forward, is on that interchange. There's been talks about him playing midfield. There's been talks about him maybe taking over that McStay role, which is now vacant. So there's a few options for Collingwood. Nick Dacos is named at a halfback, but expect him to just get 50 touches and just do whatever he wants. Richmond is a little bit more interesting. Josh Gibkiss is starting at a back pocket, which is just great to see. He's not going to have the best scoring potential, but his job security is A1. So he's probably a lock for your D6, maybe D7, depends on how deep you're going this year. Jaden Short's on a halfback. That's all good. Probably one of the most interesting ones is that Thompson Dow, 254k mid, I believe, is listed as the first on baller. That could be huge if you're looking for some of those cheaper mids, but I think we'll get to him later. Is he better than Paddy Dow? He can't be worse. And Sam Naismith, looks like Nankervis is in a race to be fit for round 0, let alone round 1. So Sam Naismith, a 123k ruck. We'll get to him later, but playing this game, really big for us. There are a few key names out for Richmond being Tom Lynch, Flostone, Nankervis, as I just mentioned, and Mantle. But they're sort of the key things to note going into the game next week. Or tomorrow.
Yeah, tomorrow. Yeah, and so by the time some people watch this, the game would have happened. So hopefully you can look back at those names. And next week we'll be able to talk about some of the other ones we noticed that stood out in the community series heading into round 0. You mentioned a couple of rucks there, so let's just jump into discussing the rucks for 2024. I'll start briefly. Lock, Brodie Grundy, thumbs up. Yeah, thumbs up. I reckon every man and his dog is going to have Brodie Grundy, 481k. New team, got the whole field to himself. They're not going to ruck anyone else. He will dominate. Dan, I might throw to you. What do you reckon are R2? That's where we're really got to start thinking.
Yeah, look, there's quite a few to choose from, and obviously we're going to go through a few of those premium options. The first one that I would suggest as a premium option to pair with Grundy is Gawn. Look, the guy had an injury interrupted year last year, a few injuries, and then obviously he had that knee that people were really worried about at the start of last season. He came back in and played pretty well, and that was in a Grundy interrupted year as well. Look, first time this guy's been under 600,000 since 2018, so it could be a bargain. Looking at that, so I think he could be. He's definitely mine at the moment. We've spoken as well about the fact that your team's probably going to change about 10,000 times between now and the actual start of the season. But yeah, he's my ruck too.
What about you, George? Who are you thinking R2 at this stage? Give us a couple of names, maybe.
Now, I'll start with one of the cheaper options, probably the only mid-price that I'd recommend not named Brodie Grundy, and that's Tristan Cherry. I don't have him, but the sole ruck for the Roos had a few good games last year, pretty young as well, so he could really take off this year, but I'm not the biggest fan when there's so much value around the premiums. I'm currently on, and have been on for most of the preseason, Rowan Marshall. Massive end to last year. It was 133 average in his last 6 games. I think the last 3, all of them were above 140. He was just immense. A lot of us picked him last year for his potential value, and this year, whilst I don't think he is as value of a pick, I still think he's someone who's really going to be up there in the upper echelon. One of the real nice things about him compared to Grundy and Gawn is that he doesn't have an early buy, which is kind of what's putting him ahead for Gawn for me right now. Gawn also just worries me a little bit. He's 32. He's had injury history. He's got questions over whether he could play a full season. At least that's what I'm thinking. Rowan Marshall, I think he's turning either 20. I think he's turning about 28. I might be wrong. It might be a year off either way, but he's in his prime. He's fit. He rucked all of last year. Saints don't have someone who's really going to come in as a second ruck. Maybe Jack Hayes, but like Rowan Marshall's going to be taking 80% of the ruck at least. Otherwise, there's one name that we should mention at least. There's a few other rucks that are premiums, but maybe not as good. But Tim English, second most expensive player in SuperCoach, 715k. He had 3 scores that were sub 100 last year. The lowest was an 88. He just racks up points. A dog's midfield that's so good and will always be so good, at least while he's there. Only problem is at his price, is the value too good around him? Rowan Marshall is about 80k cheaper. Gawn's about 120, and Grundy's almost over 200k cheaper. So if you want to spend big on English, please do, but he's not going to be in my team this year, I think.
Funny enough, when I wrote the notes at the end of last season, I wrote down in the rucks, Tim English just got to have. But then as soon as you see a price tag over 700,000, there's a fair chance anyone over 700,000 will have one bad game, they'll end up at 620,000, and then you just go bang. So it just all depends how many. There's that lack of primos in the forward line, so maybe you just stock up in the rucks and spend big and see how you go. It's certainly
Absolute worst case for someone like Tim English is you'll be able to buy him cheaper than 710k if you do need or want to upgrade from a grunt or start with Cherry. So you'll always be able to get him for cheaper than his starting price.
Yeah, I agree. That's the only thing that's putting me off. And so I also wrote down, and we'll get to him, the Bont, but he's also 700 plus, so you probably can't afford to have both of them. A couple others that potentially people could consider out there. We'll move on to the midfield, in a second. Kieran Briggs, I reckon, dominated at the back end of last season. I think he was really impressive in those finals. He's 600,000 plus, though, so Max Gawn's cheaper, but I think he's going to solo ruck pretty much of the Giants, so he's one I'd think about. And then a few people have been mentioning Luke Jackson. I know he's forward as well, but a few people I've been talking to and seeing have been putting him as the ruck. Not for me. I think Sean Darcy, not for me either. I think he's too injury prone. I would just steer clear of the twin guns at Freo. One last thing for me is the ruck R3 and who you consider for that. A couple you guys can jump in with some players maybe you're actually going to play. Every year, unless there's been a standout, I've always just picked 102,000. I shouldn't say spud, they're AFL players, but the two for me, I reckon, take your pick. There's a guy called Finbar Maley from North Melbourne. He's not getting a game, I don't reckon, and they'll play a lot on a Sunday. Or Cohen Livingston from West Coast. They're both ruck forward, so you could switch them up if you need to make a move. They're just a couple if you want to get that free loophole. I reckon they're playing a lot of Sundays, North and West Coast. Dan, anyone else we should consider in the rucks?
Yeah, look, George was talking about it before. Sam Naismith, he's going to play ruck one for the Tigers at least this week, tomorrow. Whether or not he keeps that spot, obviously they've got Nankervis coming back. I can't see him holding down that number one. But look, lots of teams are going with two rucks at the moment, and given that Tom Lynch is one of the most injury-prone players out there, I doubt that you want to risk him in the ruck. They've got Noah Bolter that they've been playing the forward. I reckon they probably could roll two rucks, and so having someone like Naismith might be a good go as that ruck three. And shout out to Aidan Begg, former Yarra Ogramarian. Look, I hope he gets to add to his list of games. He could. You know what it means though? If he plays, I hope it means that either he's got the form or a whole bunch of Collingwood injuries, and so really you can't lose. You can't lose in that. So,
nice one. Any others to think about, Georgie, before we move on?
Yeah, one that was a little bit more popular early in the preseason, Jordan Sweet of Port Adelaide, 158k. Seemingly Soldo's going to play ahead of him. I don't think Port are a team that traditionally plays two rucks. Even if they do, it's usually they've got someone like Finn Lathan who plays typically forward and can pinch hit. So I wouldn't really be worried about Jordan Sweet. A little more on the expensive side, Toby Conway at 180k. As a Cats fan, I'm hoping he gets a gig pretty soon on as well.
Me too.
Between Stanley and Blitzarves, I just don't think he's going to get enough games consistently to make enough money. Not to mention, you're having to put up at least an extra 60k from someone like Naismith. It's just a hard pick to justify at that price. Otherwise, if you are picking a loop, I think Livingston has more Sunday games, just for what it's worth. Although I would prefer to get a playing player to get that cash gen going. But if it's just going to be Sam Naismith for potentially one game, the extra 20k could go a little bit if you can find the right way to use it.
Being a Cats man as well, I reckon if Toby Conway plays, I'd almost take the punt. That'll show Geelong's intentions that are actually keen to get some games in him, and Reece might just disappear into the VFL, and that'll be that. That's the dream. But we will see. We will see what happens. Premiership player, we shouldn't take it. Cool. There's a lot of ruck advice. There'll be an article up on the Inner Sanctum's website for people as well. So you can check out some more information on these rucks going forward. We'll move on to talk about the all-important midfield. I might start with you, Dan. But let's just talk about one bloke each who we go, yep, we need him. Who is it, Dan? Who's the one we go, yep, lock in?
Yeah, look, for me, I'm not going to spend that much cash on my forwards. I'm not going to spend that much cash in rucks. I'm going to put all my cash on Bontempelli. He's 724,000. That is a monster price tag. Will you get him for cheaper if you wait throughout the year? Yeah, like it's a pretty well non-negotiable. Like it's going to happen. He will be less than 724, but will you have the spare cash of 600 plus thousand when he does go down? And do you want to miss out on him? Scoring 140s. This guy averaged 129 last season. That is a monster effort. He was clear head and shoulders above the rest of the competition in terms of that. I just reckon he's the best mid in the game. So, look, Bont's in my team. Bont's the lock.
He was that was my biggest regret last year. I thought I'd wait, just kept getting more expensive, and then I was stubborn and didn't get him. I have to. He's the first thing I have to put in. George, give us someone different. We all go Bont, maybe. If you're happy to spend the money, who else is?
I just want to note that I haven't had Bont in my team all preseason, but that's another issue we'll get to, and I hope it doesn't burn me like it did you last year, Scott. For me, this year, my first pick midfielder is Zach Butters. He came into 2023 a little bit underdone, carrying a couple of niggling injuries, just a little bit cold to start. However, I think it's from round 8 onwards, if you look at it, he just absolutely rocketed off. 121 average, I think it was 119 average at Adelaide Oval after round 8. So it's just like that's maybe not M1 numbers behind Bob, but M2. It's just like premium player. He's got the best bye, which we briefly spoke about last week. Freo and Port Adelaide, they only share the bye with each other and have the bye once. So if I'm hot on anyone, Zach Butters is my pick. Adelaide as well. Port Adelaide, sorry, just for what it's worth. 7 of their first 10 games are at Adelaide Oval. I think 4 of their first 5. That's why Zach Butters 119 at Adelaide Oval just like compounds as to why that pick is just such an easy one.
Yeah, the problem is we're all going to convince each other of who we should get, and we'll have 7 good midfielders in our midfield to start the season. Might be the way to go this year. For me, it's only purely bias, and I'm not even a Sydney supporter, but I just absolutely love Errol Goulden. I've loved him since the moment he played. I'm a left footer. He's a left footer. That's about the only where our similarity in skills lie. I just absolutely love the way he goes about it. I didn't have him last year, and I just watched him towards the back end of last year, and he just racks it up. He's going to absolutely dominate this year. I'm not even going to back him for the Brownlow, but that's another thing. 620,000. I don't care what he costs. I just want him in my side so I can watch him and actually enjoy how well he uses the footy and how well he has a crack. So he's my one. Any other mids we reckon sort of lock-ish, high price before we talk about some cheaper options?
Yeah, look, I think the list that we've got down, you got your Tom Greens, you got your Christian Petrarcas, Jordan Dawsons. There's a heap of them that are pretty amazing picks there. I think Petrarca, looking at the way that he went about it, especially if Clary doesn't sort of get up as for as many games, he's going to have to carry that midfield. And look at the way that he just absolutely pushed. Seasoned players like Jack Graham just like treated him like he's a bit of waste paper. Like he's phenomenal. So I think that Petrarca would be the other one to look at. George, any others?
Yeah. Look, for me, LDU is the other one that's been in. I'm really trying to pick players that I think are premium value this year, especially in the mids. I also want to pick players. My rule has pretty much been I don't want any mids that have an early bye. I just think that they could lose out on a bit of scoring. Petrarca, I think, had 3 scores under 100 last year. I think I've got them written down. I do 97, 97, and 95. That is just stupid good. But as good as that is, can he keep it up? It's a big question to ask over 2 years of a footballer. Same as why Bont, I think, is a hard player to pick. It's hard to pick someone at 720k for them to back it up the next year. Bont is one of the best players in the comp, though, so... But we say that every year. Rory Laird last year dropped a 50 in round 1, and I captained him, and I still don't know if I got over it. So those big players burn you. So that's why someone like LDU I'm a really big fan of. He's so good he actually broke the game last year because he was laid out 5 minutes before a game, and SuperCoach crashed when everyone was trying to get onto it. Fortunately, I didn't have him, so.
That was part of why I gave him an absolute clap last year. If you were out twice thanks to a calf muscle, come on, seriously, you learned to warm up, LDU.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah, he burned us all. He burned us big time last year. So we're very reluctant to jump on Dan and I. I think
he's had a full.
Yeah, sorry.
He seemingly had most of a preseason. He averaged 119 in his last 6 games that he played, I just like if he's going to put up 119 numbers, which he so well could in a North midfield that's not very good, where he is the best, I think he's just so easy to pick.
I think you sort of pick the 3 or 4. I think there's a lot of them similar price, similar average last year. You just sort of get a gut feel and hope for the best a little bit. Just watch the preseason games and whoever seems to go all right and go with your gut. I reckon that's half the tactic with your primos, and then hope they don't get injured. The thing is, I reckon that a bit of advice, if you pick a primo, you got to be keen to stick with them for a good while. So Andy Brayshaw stuck with me all year. I'm not picking him again as an example, but you've got to be willing to commit. Don't jump off pretty quickly with my advice. Let's have a quick look at some mid-prices, some rookies, some left field stuff. Dan, I might start with you. Give us a few names we might want to consider and have a look at before we head into the season.
Yeah, look, my first one would be George Wardlaw. This guy, break-even 65. He's costing 365,000. He had the most centre bounce attendances of any North Melbourne player in that first practice game. He gets an inside ball. He seems to be able to use it pretty well as well. I just see him as that player that in his second year is going to be on the up. And then you look at the sort of flip side, you've obviously got players like Taron Thomas, who's not going to be there. You've got Jai Simpkin, who seems to be on the outer for some reason. So there's all these like players that might be
no more
around.
Cunnington's out.
Yeah. No more Cunnington. So I think the Wardlaw is going to get a fair look at it. My other one, who is a bit of a left field option, is Nick Martin. I think he's a really interesting one. He's 492k. His break-even's 88. He moved to a halfback line as that quarterback. He used the ball pretty well and should be dual position player, defensive mid by round 6. So again, if you're looking for that sort of player that gives you a bit of flexibility in moving him back into that back line, it could be one to watch.
Cool, George. A couple of mid-price left fields. Whatever ones to consider. Who are you thinking?
Yeah, well, we write down little notes on every player, and I was going to look at my mid-prices, and my first thought was Nick Martin. I saw Dan already taking him, and I was very upset. So I think he's probably the best one. So I've opted for a player who I think is just pretty much going to do the exact same thing as him, a midfielder, 483k, Carl Amon. Also looking set to move to halfback. There's going to be a little bit more ball to go around there, and I think there's going to be less users back there. Sicily is, of course, the main one. They picked up Massimo D'Ambrosio from Essendon, another ball user who they plan to use back there. Had a good first scratch match game, so he's another one to consider a little bit cheaper. But Carl Amon, he can use the footy well. He's been used as a on-ball or wingman throughout his whole career, so potentially a bit of cheap footy down back, someone who can get a bit of DPP as well. Unfortunately, didn't play in the first scratch match, so I'm really keen to see how it goes in this next practice match. Looking a bit more left field, I touched on him earlier, Thompson Dow, 254k. He could get that third mid-rotation behind Taranto and Hopper, which is really big. It's a position where he could easily make 150k if he averages around 80. I'm not sure what the exact number is off the top of my head. There is going to be no Taranto. In the most recent scratch match, he had the most CBAs with no Taranto or Dusty, so that is a little bit of a draw card against him. But if he actually gets those CBAs in the upcoming game, this will probably go out after it. But if he did get those, yeah, really someone on high on my watch list.
Oh, there's just going to be so many others to choose from. A couple from me. I know you noted down Ollie Wines as well. He was the first one that came to mind. Seems to me like there's talk they'll be back playing inside mid where maybe he suits best. I just think that the buyer beware a little bit with Ollie Wines. He's 460k, I think. Butters and Rosie in there are probably better than him. So it felt like last year was a bit past and a bit slow. So I don't know whether he's worthwhile. Same with like Matt Crouch. I know he's sort of back in and was racking up some points a little bit towards the back end of the year, but surely Laird and Dawson are better than him and another year on. I'm a bit worried. He's just under 500,000. And then Cam Guthrie's only 420,000. But of course, he's hurt himself in that practice game against Carlton. So I think we'll be cautious with him. They're just a few around the 400 mark, I thought. I promised I would never talk about Max Holmes on this thing. But if they do play him across half back with his pace, watch out. That's all I'm going to say. We'll move on from Max Holmes. Any rookies, George, we can who's our top rookies to consider in the midfield?
Yeah, I just very quickly want to touch on a couple we probably should have talked about in the forward line last week. Lazaro and Windsor. Lazaro more so, 181k. Looks like could be getting CBAs. Had a score of 84, I think it was, or 87 on 74 CBAs and around 24 last year, seemingly getting those again. So he's one to keep an eye on. Windsor's been talked up by Petrarca a lot. Could be playing on a wing. Just someone to keep an eye on to help fill out that. In terms of pure midfielders, the one that I've got is Riley Sanders. Had the most CBAs for the Bulldogs in their scratch match. He just looks like an absolute freak. I don't think I'm someone I really need to. I don't think I need to talk about him too much. He's in pretty much everyone's sides already. He's going to be picked round one by all accounts, but he's just a gun. Dan, I'll throw over to you because I think you've got the other mid rookie who is just an absolute freak of nature.
Yeah, I think I feel like maybe Scott has the freak of nature.
He does too. My bad.
my guy, not so much a freak of nature, but he actually didn't even play. He had illness. Look, the reason why I put up this guy is because I feel like there's the rookies that everyone has, and so I'm sure Scott's going to talk about one rookie that everyone will have. I'm sure like Riley Sanders is a rookie that everyone will have. Going back to the forwards from last week, Harley Reid again is a rookie that everyone will have. But this guy, I think that it's an interesting one. So Jeremy Sharp, only 123k. Lots of the other rookies that we've sort of been talking about are those higher price rookies. I know that we obviously spoke about like Nick Watson last week as well, about that sort of small forward role. Like, will he get the ball? Jeremy Sharp, he's a guy that will get the ball in the wing. He's a two-way runner. I think that's something that's that's needed in terms of that wing role. I think Scott was talking about them trialing a few different players on that wing. I just feel like he's the one that will lock it down and get that wing role for Freo. Yeah, look, one to watch. Obviously, we were talking about that idea of checking out the games this week, and because he missed the last one, yeah, just watch out this week.
Yeah, I agree. I just always think with rookies, if they're playing round one, it's better than if they're not. The one we should talk about, obviously, you mentioned a couple of times, not in name, but Colby McKercher from North Melbourne. I assume that's how you say his name. Picked 2 in the draft, 202,000, so a bit more expensive as a rookie, but if he's picked, which he has to be, he looked right at home. Lock him in. I think he's the most picked midfield rookie at the moment, so with no surprise given the way he went and the hype on him. So lock him in. Talking about ones that may be potentially a bit of left field or ones that others might have. I'm being Geelong. I like Jai Clark. So hopefully he's had a good preseason. He's ready to roll and he's only 123k. So if he does, they can only play him in the midfield. I don't think there's anywhere else he could play. So maybe Guther's down and Jai in. So any others, George, we should have a chat about?
Yeah, I'll mention a couple of players who had really good scratch matches. I'll start with the Hawks boy, Henry Huswaite. Played the last 2 games of last year for a couple of decent scores, but nothing too notable. It has elevated his price a bit, which is annoying, but what can you do? I mentioned him because he had the most CBAs in Hawthorn's scratch match. Unfortunately for Hawthorn, they've got a injury list about as long as my leg stacked on top of my other leg, which is upsetting. The big one of note is Will Day, someone who's probably going to be getting those mid-rotations. I've heard absolutely positive things about him last year. I've heard more positive things about him this year. He might be coming back around April, so he might get a few good games out of Huswaite, but it's going to be difficult to determine whether he's going to be an option. The other player I'm mentioning is Jacob Weir, 123k rookie, huge fourth quarter in the GWS scratch match. I think it was like 11 touches or something. Just went absolutely nuts when given his opportunity. 19 touches fully for the day. Watch him in the next match. Watch him in round 0 to see if he actually locks down that position. But someone who's had a few games in the AFL system, so has been around a little while, someone to consider. Dan, anyone else on the list?
Yeah, just looking at one that you'd written down as well, which I was watching the Saints Dons game. Riley Bonner coming off that half back. Obviously, he did it for Port. There was a year where he was someone that we sort of picked up as a rookie that made us a fair bit of cash. Priced at 284. He's an interesting one. Look, you've made the note, and I completely agree. That was a game without Sinclair, so how much ball is really going to go through him when you've got someone like Sinclair that's a better user? I don't know. It's going to be interesting. So again, just sort of one to look out for. I think that's an important point as well to make, is just that thing of, although they might be getting a heap of ball, like have a look at who's not playing. Because like sometimes you just get burnt by that player coming back in, like they're playing a role, but that role isn't really theirs. It's always one to look out for.
Yeah, just touching on that, in the first preseason game for the Bulldogs, we got absolutely peak Bevo where they just threw around the ab magnets. Half the ones were playing in the back half of the game. I think Bont was one of them, so it was a bit hard to get a full read on roles, but just absolutely chronic Luke Beveridge in that game.
Mate, he was
He's a
Bevo.
menace.
Bevo got a fair few mentions on the podcast last year, that's for sure.
I'm sure we'll get a few more.
Yeah, agreed. Couple more bits of advice, I reckon, things to sort of keep an eye on. It's going to be a lot different this year with round 0. There's going to be, if there's any rookies, obviously, that go nuts, you just get them in because their price is going to go up. But if some rookies are just okay, there'll be a lot who just jump on because they've got a game, but I wouldn't be afraid to not necessarily pick them if they just go okay and it's back, your judgment of the other team. So that might be a bit of a point of difference. And then I'm always loath to pick anyone who's got any injury concerns at all. So as soon as I saw Sam Walsh slight back issue, even if he plays round 1 or round 0, whatever, I'm still not convinced. Oliver, not convinced because of all the stuff. Just any of those ones that are a bit iffy, you better to be cautious rather than not. That's my advice.
Yeah.
And with round 0, it's also important to remember that the price changes, even though the scores don't count to our teams, the price changes do come into effect that round earlier. So it's going to be, you're really going to need to toe the line between the mid prices who score a 90 and suck you in and you think, fuck, I've got to bring them in. Like, this is going to be so good. And then all of a sudden the next week they drop a 40 and then all of a sudden you've wasted it. I haven't wasted a trade, which is good, but you'll have to waste another trade to get them back out. If I could very quickly just touch on a couple of the other midfielders who are premiums that we didn't mention, I just think are worth a shout. Jordan Dawson, Rory Laird is going to be one who we touch on an article going up on the Inner Sanctum, but I do want to speak on Jordan Dawson because he is the more popular player. 27 years old, fully got the year in the midfield last year, only went sub 110 twice after the buys, and one of them was 102, which barely counts the stat. He's going to be an absolute freak again this year. Sam Walsh briefly mentioned that injury has me put off. Tom Green, the early buy makes it difficult. He's also not the cleanest ball user. Someone like Tim Taranto last year, who was just, you'd watch him get 35 possessions and then you'd watch him kick it to the opposition 20 times and you'd think, what are we doing here? You'd be wanting to tear your hair out. And the last couple who I just want to mention, I think, was Caleb Sarong. We've spoken about Brayshaw numerous times on this podcast today, but Sarong seemingly a bit of a safer role. Best buy, as I mentioned earlier, with Zach Butters. He's just someone I really want to keep an eye out, especially just in that next practice match that he has. But I think otherwise, it's most of the midfielders that won't be spoken about in a few articles to come.
Well, I think whichever midfielders do dominate, we can say we either spoke about them or wrote about them. So we've covered all our bases, that's for sure. I'd be interested to know. I have no idea, to be honest, but there wouldn't be that many mid prices last year for all the ones that get talked about every year. Anyone who's between 300 and 450 who just went bang and was dominant. So it doesn't feel like there's ever too many. So I usually just try and go one at the most. So you're trying to think, Dan. There wasn't too many. There never is. So.
Well, yeah, you make a good point, and I think that lots of people probably had Hopper in last year as that person that they thought, he's going to take off, and I think he got shown up he got injured, but shown up for a little bit shaky ball use. There's a few others as well, but you're right. Yeah. There's not that many.
Yeah, I reckon if you
this year.
Yeah, sorry, George.
It's sort of interesting this year. No, it's sort of interesting because it feels like this year most of the mid prices we're talking about are 500k or at least 450 is the cheapest, and they're like fallen premiums. Ollie Wine, as we know, has gone big before. Matt Crouch is a proven midfielder. A couple of them are like Nick Martin's a rising star, whereas last year it felt like a lot of them were the Settlefields who are around 350k, less proven. So it's really interesting to see this year how that dynamic changes with the bigger guys. Wardlaw, I think, is one of the only 360k guys that we spoke about this year. And last year, I wasn't too hot on any of them. Wardlaw, I kind of like, but I've been playing around with my team a lot, finding space for those 360k mids. Even the 460k ones, I'm really struggling with. But look, that might change following a positive preseason game. I might try to work around, see if I can fit him in.
Yeah, I think it.
Get sucked in, George. Get sucked
Yeah,
in.
no,
Just,
don't.
I won't let
just
it
go
happen.
for it.
I
Go
will let
for
it happen. I won't let it happen.
No,
They
don't.
get 40 touches. They kick 3. Just bring him in.
Oh, this is,
Thompson Dow is going to worry me. Because he's in that price range where it's like, oh yeah, it's only an extra 80K to turn like a Daniel Curtin into him. It's like, oh, it's like, oh man, could really is on-field option. You get scared by those blokes.
yeah, and there's not. I can't even think of too many also who used to be guns, and then they drop off, and all we just talk about them like they're going to be guns again. When does that happen? It's not so rare in SuperCoach. Taylor Walker was one I thought of just off the top of my head that just went bang again a little bit, but there's no way Ollie Wines and
That was a
Crouch.
great few weeks.
Yeah, there's no way all
Danny
those blokes.
Dangerfield.
Well, when exactly? He's gone. We haven't talked about him, and we're not going to. All right. On that note, I think we've more than truly covered every mid-pricer in the comp nearly. There's a bit of advice for you. Please check out the articles that we write for you guys as well on these rucks and mids as well.
If I can just add, if you don't mind, I'll just add, there should be a few, once this podcast is out, there should be a few that are already about some of the defenders that we didn't touch on last week. Read about Mitch Hinge. He's going to be the best defender in the comp. I'm certain of it.
Cool. You heard it here first. Cool. And also, of course, I mentioned last week, but on my little name there, we've got the email address of the podcast here. So the SuperCoach Sanctum has its own team. So if you're wanting to add a team to your league, please just shoot us an email with your league code, and we're happy to jump in. Happy to jump in a few leagues for sure, and you can follow on the podcast and also see how our team goes against yours. That's it for this week. Episode 2 down. Hopefully we can find some other people that want to join us three next week. Thanks for your time. Thanks to those people watching the Sanctum SuperCoach Sanctum. I've got to get the name right. We'll get there. Until next week. Have a good night, guys.